Hi, this is Paul. In the video I did earlier this week, had a little clip from Malcolm and Simone Collins. I had never heard of them before, but as always, you all send me the most interesting things. The same person that sent me this sent me another very interesting video with Jordan Peterson on, and a couple that I it's what's very interesting is that a bunch of these channels, they're small YouTube channels, but you get the sense that these people are living out there in the online world in other ways. So I am something of a digger, and so I started digging into Basecamp with Simone and Malcolm Collins, and lots of videos. You know, it's not a very big channel, 7,400 subs. Lots of videos, many videos with some of them 2K, 1K, other videos smaller, videos in the triple digits. And then I noticed that, oh, wait a minute. This channel has a history. This channel goes back a long ways. Simone has been doing YouTubes for quite a while. And then 11 years ago, this is old-timey YouTube. And then I saw the first one of them together. And I thought, oh, that's got to be interesting. Let's take a look at that.
Wow. It has been a long time since I have uploaded anything here, and that's because a lot has happened. For example, when I first was posting videos here, I had this mission to fall in love and have my heart broken in 1 year and learn how to date. And then I met this guy, and I fell in love with him. He broke my heart. And then something really unexpected happened. We decided to get married, and we're going to get married in summer of 2015, and we also decided to start a business together. So I quit my job, and he quit his other plans, and we started an art commissioning business called Art Corgi. So we do actually make some videos related to that if you want to still see stuff by me. Our channel about our startup and what we've learned from starting our own company is called Startup Style. And we also have a channel about how our relationship started and what we've learned from that. And it's called The Happy Couple. So if you want to get more updates from the weird girl who you once saw videos from, you can do so by subscribing to both or one of those channels. Again, it's...
Now, I didn't go and dig up those channels. I'm not even sure those channels could be dug up. But I did see, in fact, that they've had... They were on Piers Morgan at one point. They're super into this postnatalism. In fact, there was a Vice article about them back in April of 2023. Simone and Malcolm Collins, the elite couple and pro-natalists who are breeding to save the world, are also prolific Redditors and unstoppable posters. Super online, and you know, anime is going to trigger some of you. I know that. A good friend of mine said anime is right next door to, and then I won't finish his sentence. But yeah. And then I found this conversation with Alex Kachuda, who, you know, I heard a bit about her before. And I've never really followed her too closely, but it was interesting that they showed up here. So it's just very interesting sort of looking at where people sort of arise and how they transform. And of course, I've always got this sort of pro-felicity stuff in the back of my mind. They get a little bit into the background of how they met on Alex's channel.
A background here. How did you find each other? Because you are kind of a hydra. You have the same project. You're very much aligned. You know, most people, myself included, were just kind of like, you know, fumbling in the dark, and you know, maybe we gather some things. But you guys seem to have a very structured approach to everything. You're literally writing books about it.
Simone, you want to go over the story of how we met? Yeah, sure. I'll do the rundown. So yeah, you're totally right. We're way too weird about the way we do everything. So the way it came down for us meeting was I turned 24 and had never really dated anyone before. I mean, people probably thought they were dating me, but I was too autistic to actually realize that. So, whoops.
But she
And so,
never kissed anyone, never had sex. That's what she means. Like never went out there.
completely clueless. So
What a
I
catch.
decided that even though I was going to live alone forever, because that would be amazing, that I would first fall in love and have my heart broken so I could say I tried it and it was underwhelming. And, then people wouldn't look at me and be so, weird about it. Like, oh, that poor girl has never known love. So
Pause. When we had our Barbie live stream last week, Sam told me about this Mary Harrington, Taylor Swift piece, which of course I looked up because I wasn't not going to look that up. And it's a common knowledge that women like love stories, and those which gain iconic status tend towards tragedy. Why? It's just the tragedy that speaks to the emotional intensity of being young. I'm staid middle-aged now, but I remember the exquisite agony of teenage unrequited love, not to mention the perverse draw of sexual liaisons too edgy, kinky, or otherwise intense to last. She basically talks about how part of the Taylor Swift story is leading towards, in some ways, kind of a dark romantic vision of the conclusion. Since I was an adolescent in the 90s, the internet has eaten most of the culture and normalized mass embodiment. Perhaps it's no wonder so many of us, and especially young women, now experience these interconnected longings, first to escape embodiment and then, relatedly, to be dissolved into passionate intensity. Taylor Swift's genius is her capacity to give catchy tunes to that sweet, painful, multifaceted longing for something other or higher than what's in front of us. Now, this is rather ironic given the goal of these two, which is very much remember, embody. On the surface, her work recounts relatable romantic highs and lows, but its 800-year undertow implicitly glorifies those who renounce any possibility of happiness in this world in exchange for the exaltation that comes from seeking something higher, even if the price of reunion with the divine must be death. For young women who thrill to this promise don't even realize that they crave is not sexual or romantic but spiritual. It's the cruelest imaginable way to both promising and denying relief. But that's the fault of the age, not of the 21st century's foremost troubadour, Taylor Swift. Now, so she's got, again, this sort of young, dark, romantic fatalism, but of course it doesn't happen. Now, I actually recorded a bunch of this and it wasn't recording. That's one of the things I'm going to conquer next year. I've lost way too many things recording and not really recording. Part of what's fascinating about this story is that the narrative of onlineness is disembodiment and nihilism and antinatalism, and these two that are about as online as you can imagine are going the other way. It's onlineness. Now, all of us are formed and shaped. We absorb this first draft map of the world, mostly from our parents, and then, of course, as bit by bit we begin to look beyond our parents. And right now, a lot of that looking beyond is looking at screens and absorbing things in screens. Walk through Hans-Georg Mueller's nomenclature. Sincerity he defines as living out the cultural, traditional, religious expectation of our group in which we are birthed and formed. Authenticity is the quest, expressive individualism, the quest to live out the secret, sacred self, and to somehow always be checking that secret, sacred self against the world. It's the quest for authenticity, which is sort of a back and forth, inside and outside. And when you find positive feedback coming back, then somehow you discover your true self. Pro-Felicity adds the additional dimension of being watched and getting input from those watching you, and shaping yourself to the camera, to the black mirror. And these two seem deeply in the realm of Pro-Felicity.
So I created a scoring system. I created a competitive dating round at my office where, you get points for like first base, date that lasts longer than 5 hours or something, to, motivate me to get out there, because dating is hard. So I was dating very heavily. I'd keyword stuffed my OkCupid profile at the time with like sort of know your meme references, because I knew exactly my target audience. I was posing in film grade stormtrooper armor in my photos. So, I knew.
So it's so funny because, of course, many women are they're navigating. We do our sense making through each other, and so part of the reason women are always competing with each other, and they're navigating with each other instead of, let's say, to a degree, because women use men as proxies to peel off the top, right? And women are using men to push each other up the hierarchy. Women are playing a different game over here, but they're still using each other in this mating competition.
What I was in for. And Malcolm similarly was on what he would call a high throughput screening kind of campaign.
Marriage Quest. I was trying to do 5 dates a week at least for a period of about 2 years.
And so he told me basically that on our first date, he sat across from me at dinner and he said, well, I'm not really looking to date. I'm looking for a wife, and I expect to find her this fall at Stanford, where there's a large pool of pre-vetted candidates. So he made it both clear that he was looking for a wife, that he didn't think that I was that wife because he was going to get one at Stanford, and that, he was really honest. And it was the first honest date I ever went on, right? I mean, when you go on a date with someone, like typically like they probably want to have sex with you, or they have some other.
Now, honesty, again, if there's something that's sort of emerging out of the meaning crisis, it's honesty. I mean, honesty is a hallmark of the Jordan Peterson movement. Tell the truth, or at least don't lie. Jordan has many, many hours on the internet talking about why it's so important to tell the truth, and it's important to tell the truth so that you don't mess yourself up, so that you don't lose yourself. There was a lot of time in the recent Chris Williamson, Jordan Peterson conversation about that.
The thing, but no one ever talks about that. You talk about like anything else but what people are actually there for, which was for me so frustrating because I just wanted to know what people wanted. And I just thought that was great. And I also thought it was perfect because that way I thought I could date him. We would break up. I forced him to set a breakup date with me, and then he would go find his wife and I would live alone forever. That particular
I forced him to set a breakup date with me. These are two unusual individuals.
Plan completely fell apart. We are very happily married. We've been together for 11 years now, and we have 3 kids going on hopefully 7. So like we're in it, and we love life together. But it was both very intentional, but the outcome was not what we had expected. And I think that's kind of the thing is we plan to the nines and do try to intentionally think through everything, but we also rapidly iterate and update when we get new information. And it doesn't matter if it's about like a life partner or a philosophy or scientific information. When we get new information, we adapt and we change our plans. We don't just stick to something because it's what we originally believed.
Now, what she said there is going to become super important when it comes to religion, because as their scheme unfolds, it's a phenomenal story. I mean, remember what I said in a previous video? You say, Paul, there's only been 2,500 videos. How can I remember what you said in a previous video? No, more recently. In that video that not a lot of you watched, where I had the Chris Williamson, Konstantin Kisin, the Chris Williamson, Jordan Peterson. Chris Williamson makes a really important point. Maybe I'll find that video.
The things I've been talking about in the live shows is your comparison group is incorrect. The fact that, we have the opportunity to sit down and listen to anybody on the planet, right? The best minds, the best athletes, the best thinkers, the most articulate, that are alive right now, or listen to the people that have died that were around when video cameras existed, and you can compare yourself to that group.
Yeah.
But that's not your comparison group. If you have the impetus to sit down and listen to me and you waffle on for 3 hours about these deep topics, these interesting ideas, you are so already selected out of the normal group. You're already asking yourself questions that
The right questions.
almost nobody else is, right? But because your comparison group are people that are unbelievably high performing. I remember before I started my podcast,
Okay.
I'd listen to you or to Sam or to Joe, and I'd think, God, their recall is amazing. It's so it's like they've just got this eidetic memory and everything that they've ever read.
So there's an idealization. There's a sort of reaching for the ideal, but earlier there's also the forming of the internet. So earlier in the video. Earlier in the video, Chris is talking about the fact this whole gym thing where people are sort of calibrating with each other. You know, women are taking videos of themselves and they're looking at how often men look at them, and then if men look at them too often for them, then they're, you know, annoyed. It's the gaze, it's the male gaze, yada yada. And yes, of course, that whole Tom Brady Saturday Night Live skit, unless of course she's there for the guy to want to look at her, but of course the beauty means that everybody sees it, and she wants to be sort of a sharpshooter for the guy she wants, but what she's really doing is sending out a signal that everybody is seeing. So these two are just super online, and you can just see all of this stuff just building.
Yeah, I mean, very interestingly, this is a very kind of similar strategy to one that I use. It wasn't so well structured. It wasn't so well thought out. It wasn't so, I guess, detailed and meticulous in its execution. But that's pretty much what both me and my husband did. We were very kind of with the keyword stuffing. That rings very true. Like I definitely did that with my OkCupid profile. That's where I met my husband. And I just kind of I keep encouraging people to see these websites as a tool, because I feel like they've kind of taken on a cultural life of their own. I mean, these are.
But you can see the tooling of how many other things in these stories where they're just tooling at different levels. The prolificity levels are just layer after layer after layer.
Databases of people. Many of them will be looking for similar things to you, but I think people over optimize for reach and for mass appeal. Like, you know, women posting cleavage shots even though they want to get a husband. I mean,
Yes.
You will get more engagement, I guess, if that's what you're optimizing for. But that's a vanity metric. If you want to find the one, so don't park your boobs on the thing. That's not how you get it. So, yeah, I mean, it's hard to convince people of this, but I think app dating can be very useful. I mean, it's proven miraculous in my life, and you know, I'm now heading for baby number 2 myself, and you know, my marriage is great. You know, it's app derived. It's generated by the terrible algorithms, but hey, it worked, and I think it can work for other people, but they have to have a pragmatic approach to how to use this stuff.
I mean, app dating has really changed recently, and I think we need to be transparent about this. We found each other back in the old days of OkCupid before the swipe dating revolution, and I saw a tweet recently that I really emphasized was where it said, you know, being in a happy relationship these days feels a bit like having caught the last chopper out of Nam. Like, I look at the people who are dating today in this like Skinner box swipe.
I get the sense this guy is really smart. He is really sharp. He's really intuitive. But we're going to keep listening to him because, again, smart is not all there is in terms of being right or being wise, but he's really smart.
Based ecosystem. And I don't know if I would have been able to be as effective in the dating pool in this current market.
It depends. I think I was, you know, I met my husband about 6 years ago, and we were very much within the swiping system. I mean, we swiped on OkCupid. OkCupid had already transformed into a Tinder clone. It did have a more, I guess, generous space dedicated to the bio. It wasn't like 3 points, but yeah, it was it was kind of like that. And I'm sure things are much worse, and I do have the last chopper out of Nam feeling, but I think it's still possible. It's still people. Maybe it sounds like a boomer now, but it's there's still people in there. I think no. So yeah, I mean, I do hope it still works. I hope I'm not giving people terrible advice, but yeah, I mean, I guess it worked for me, and my chopper was fine. So I guess get your own chopper.
Yeah, I think if you're intentional enough and you understand the adverse incentives and other corrupting factors at play in the current design of the system, and you play the system, then you can absolutely make it out of Nam. I think the problem is that people are getting played by the system, and they're also like, women are going on, they're serving up boob pics because it generates attention. Then they end up pairing off with a lot of men who would sleep with them but would never date them. Then they get the impression that those are the men who would be willing to commit to them.
Now, I know nothing about this stuff because, of course, I was getting out of Dunkirk, not Nam. Well, actually, closer to Nam, but you get my point. Of course, the boob stuff, that was built for an era of there's only a certain number of men to see you. But, of course, it's multiplied by the way that the internet works. So it's an adaptive problem that the boob pics are. Yeah, they're right. They're looking for the wrong thing in that environment. In the other environment, I shouldn't have said anything.
And they aren't. They're lazy 8s, and maybe these women are like a 6 or a 7. And so then they're not willing as a 6 or a 7 to date 6s or 7s who would be interested in marrying them. And then there's this sort of like broken dynamic where
boy, you know who that sounds like? You've all seen this.
All right, so let me go ahead and take this down, ma'am. Men who make the kind of money you're talking about have options.
And off Kevin Samuels goes.
a lot of like, we'll say like 7s and below of men have trouble finding anyone who's willing to go on a date with them. And then women who are 7s and below have a lot of trouble finding any men who are, 8s, 9s, and 10s who they think would be interested in them to ultimately marry them. So a lot of people just end up alone.
Yeah, I think, I'm just saying this stuff should be common knowledge, but it is very counterintuitive. And a lot of people, at least in the case of women, hope dies last in a lot of these things. And I know a lot of women, essentially stuck in the so-called friends with benefits hell, just waiting on to be, wife number 5 for some strange guy who's, maybe like just slightly more attractive than they are. And then, they're just hoping that one day he'll just wake up and, propose because, I don't know, she's really good in bed or something like that. I know it doesn't work like that, but, like I said, hope dies last.
I mean, I think we also need to be honest that we are having a bit of a masculinity crisis in terms of what it means to be a man in our modern society. It was very interesting to me. On some recent podcasts, one people were saying, "Oh, he looks so soy." And I'm sorry, I have to apologize to your listeners. This is not my house. I'm staying at a guest house right now. I did not choose this background. Speaking of looking soy, or that they look like a lesbian couple. And what it has made clear to me,
I think the guy is really smart.
Is that the male role models we have in our society today are often the iteration of masculinity that men are when they are teenage boys. When a man is in a long-term monogamous relationship and when a man starts to have kids, his testosterone level drops because his biology basically turns off suicide mode and is like, okay, now you're secure, now you have kids, we want to keep you alive a long time, turn off this high-risk, high-reward strategy. And this sort of kinder iteration of masculinity, when people look for it in our society, they see so few role models that embody it. The first thing that pops into their head is, oh, lesbians, that's kind masculinity. And it's a real, I mean, you see someone like Andrew Tate, right? Which I think
I'm really surprised they don't have more followers on YouTube. I really am, because although you listen to like, I think a lot of his stuff would go really good in sort of little snippets because he just, I mean, it's sort at some point it's sort of like listening to Machine Gun. It's just ba 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 ba, and there's a lot of stuff in there.
I think represents sort of the teenage boy's ideal of what it would be like to be an adult man. Whereas because men sort of go through this second puberty, when I look at like his lifestyle, it looks about as fun as Blippi's lifestyle. I don't know anyone here who has kids, and Blippi's like this little kid who he's a grown man, but who like wears overalls and like dances around like
Now I gotta look this up. Oh, it's Pee Wee Herman playing it straight. It's Blue's Clues guy. It's wow, Billy Beez in Anaheim, California. Well, now I know. Just doing the Googling for you.
a fire truck or something. And of course, to a little kid, it's like, this guy is living in heaven. Oh my God, he gets to dance around fire trucks all day. But as an adult, like, I see the pain behind his eyes. And I'm like, I know no adult actually wants to live this lifestyle. And if you are a dad looking at...
Blippi could make bank, but every morning he lays in bed thinking, oh, I gotta do it again. At least Mr. Rogers had dignity.
Andrew Tate's lifestyle, he is like the Blippi for teenage boys, where you're like, nobody is enjoying this.
That's brilliant. Andrew Tate is the Blippi for teenage boys. That's really good.
Yeah, no, that's a very good comparison. I mean, it's it does seem like we've kind of stuck culturally on a certain archetype, which is in a way not differentiated at all. And I think maybe, people like Andrew Tate are kind of a reaction to the fact that, the baseline is very androgynous. We're all the same type of cog in the machine type of person,
Yeah.
the ideal producer consumer who has to go out and get the status points, get the money. And then I guess, in our spare time, we fetishize these cargo cults of masculinity, of Andrew Tate is essentially the mirror image of Kim Kardashian, which has all these like hypertrophied aspects of femininity. I mean, it's,
That was brilliant too. I never sort of put Andrew Tate and Kim Kardashian next to each other in terms of the, they've got all this plastic masculinity and femininity. And of course, Andrew Tate is a pimp. I mean, what I've heard of the dude is a pimp. That's what he is. And, as a father, I have like zero respect for a pimp, because a pimp isn't even a man. A pimp is a bully who makes money off other women's misery. So, but again, back to the profilicity part of it, again, in this screen world, reductive worlds must accentuate what the biases of their world. And so Kim Kardashian, Andrew Tate, they have to accentuate certain things because that's what the medium forces. That's the combination between the medium and a hierarchy. So it's gonna sort of run it up the hierarchy, and that's what we get.
They're golden calves of whatever is missing in our core
That's brilliant, especially golden. That's really good
culture, and it really, I feel like what's missing here is just the pragmatism of what it would take to continue our culture, because this infinitely malleable producer consumer, he can't think above the timeline of his own life. I mean, production consumption happens within mostly youth, because even old age is very much questionable under the producer consumer model. Because
my wife and I, we tell our kids, we say, we don't need anything for Christmas. Please do not buy us anything. All we want, it sounds so cliche, like a drippy love song, but all we want for Christmas is you at home. It's all we want for Christmas these days. We're at that point in our lives where we look around at our kids and we just want to see you. We just want to spend time with you. We just want to know you. It's all we want. We don't need you buying any stuff for us. We just want, you to visit us in the nursing home. So it's interesting again, because now I've listened to a little bit of Simone and Colin's videos, and there's a lot about the perpetuation of the culture. But of course, that has to be understood because all of them are sort of acknowledging that the culture is in something of a death spiral. So it's like, well, do you really want the perpetuation of the culture? And there's sort of a, again, so this is all pitched as sort of pragmatism, but so often what is kind of missed in pragmatism is that the ideals and the goals are implicit. And this culture that is in a death spiral, this is the one you want to preserve? Or ought you to think about actually improving the culture into one that is worth saving? And then suddenly you're into the much more religious landscape. Not a religious landscape that, well, we have to be religious so that culture must be preserved. Well, this isn't the culture you want to preserve. You don't want to keep producing a culture that shoots Andrew Tate and Kim Kardashian up the hierarchy. That's not the culture you want. So then you have to do the much harder question of, what is a good culture? What is the culture that ought to be preserved? What culture is pointing towards pointing towards eternity?
What are you going to consume? You can't really play the status games very much. So you've got about a 30, 40-year window where you can be a good participant in this culture. And I feel like, it's really shortchanging not only older people, but our entire future, the entire horizon of what's coming after us. It's almost making us blind to what's coming. And that's what I appreciate about you, because you're thinking about this very deep.
Let's talk about the collapse of civilization.
Yes, please.
This is a very important topic. So this is something I really got. So I was a venture capitalist in South Korea, and I'm always.
Now, again, hearing origin story, why, Paul, do you do these Randos conversations? Now, some of you are saying, I haven't seen a lot of Randos conversations yet. Yeah, that's because I was traveling. And it's also because I'm putting the Randos conversations into the $3 membership thing. Is that a money grab? No, not really. Some of them are never going to be sprung from there. Others of them are sitting there. And at some point, I'm going to feed them out into the general channel just so that it's going to even out the pauses. And so some of you are going to say, yeah, then I'm going to see reruns because I'm a $3 member. Life is tough.
Always having to predict the future of the economy there and everything like that. And if you look at their current fertility rate, which is 0.8, that means for and it's dropping every year. So it might be like 0.7 next year, it looks like. That means for every 100 Koreans alive today, there's going to be between 6.6 and 4.3 great-grandchildren. So we're looking at a 95% population collapse in the next century. And I went and I brought this to the other partners at my firm. And I was like, there is no economy here in the future. What are we talking about, long-term Korean economy? There is no long-term Korean economy. The way we structured our economic system doesn't work with this kind of collapse. And what they basically said is, oh yeah, we all know about this, but we've just chosen collectively not to freak out about it. So just pretend like it's not the case. And when I came back to the US, we are today where Korea was in the 90s, but we're seeing all the same trends here. It's like a Black Mirror episode or like a Sliders or something. I got to travel back in time 20 years and I get to warn people about the things that I noticed. One is there is no point at which people really start to panic. And by the time people start to panic, it's too late. So if you have a society where 80% of the population is over 50, they may still have 50 years of their life left, half their life left, but they're not having any more kids. And so if you wait until that happens to sound the alarm, it's already game over. You've got to sound the alarm way before you notice this in population levels.
This is so interesting, and it's well argued. Catastrophism is big business. It really is. Now, I watched this video, the video that I'm talking about with Malcolm and Simone Collins, and I was thinking about this video that I watched with Bret Weinstein, and they're all talking about the wokeism as sort of the collapse of civilization. I mean, the truth is there's always all these threats all over the place. Well, the people on one side say, oh, climate change is going to do you in. Other people say, nah, it's not going to be climate change. It's going to be wokeism and what that had. And oh, if we had a chance to go back in time and warn them in the past.
This way. If we take your question about what could we have said to the people of 1995 to get them to save us from the world of 2023, the coming calamity that is going to happen if we just simply embrace the religious doctrines, philosophies, and values of the past and hope that we can now ride out the storm, that's when we could stop now by having a conversation that says, look, it was wrong to dispense with these compendiums of wisdom that we've been handed in all of these traditions. But those compendiums of wisdom were built by natural selection in an environment we no longer live in. And so we are stuck in a terrible problem, which is you can't embrace the solutions of the past to get out of the problems of the present, and you can't abandon the solutions of the past because they're outdated, because you'll end up abandoning all sorts of stuff that matters in ways you don't know about. So that is, I don't want to candy coat it.
Yeah.
There's no simple solution to that that doesn't involve repeatedly injuring ourselves as a civilization as we discover which fraction of those traditions is still relevant, which fraction has become toxic and inappropriate, what it should be replaced with.
Now, in a lot of ways, Malcolm and Simone do sort of belong sort of right next to Bret Weinstein, even though they're looking at completely different catastrophes, because Bret is, if you've watched any Bret, he's on the one point again and again and again and again about, the assassin genetics, and we have to transcend them. And, I've dealt with a lot of this idea before. And what's fascinating is that Malcolm and Simone are saying, you don't need a time machine. Actually, if you look at this now and you look at the numbers now, but this is a kind of a slow thing that there's nobody recognize it. But of course, it's a different thing than what Bret is talking about. So basically, you got all these sandwich board guys. The end is near. And if you throw Eric Weinstein into the mix, then you really have a group of sandwich board guys. And it's not without truth. Because so you take Malcolm's doomsday that, no, we're just doing it to ourselves slowly. And if you have a population which is more than half over 50 years, yeah, it's just math. And add that to Eric and Bret. But you also have to throw C.S. Lewis into the mix with Life in the Atomic Age. And please tell me when humanity wasn't hanging from a thread.
Everybody is enjoying this.
Yeah, no, that's a very good comparison. I mean, it's it does seem like we've kind of stuck culturally on a certain archetype, which
oops, I gotta kill that one. When you have too many tabs over, sometimes you forget exactly which one you're playing where.
And the other thing is that there is no natural floor. Actually, the UN, I think it's the UN or the World League, I don't remember, but one of the major organizations that tracked this, they used to believe that no country could fall below repopulation rate. So in all their data, it would just show everything plateauing when a country hit repopulation fertility rate. That means that they're having enough kids just to repopulate the number of adults. If you look at the world today, people are like, oh, this is a developed world problem. No, if you look at Latin America, as of 2 years ago by UN statistics, so like a lot of progressives, they're like, oh, we'll just import immigrants, right? In the US at least. It's like, did you not know that like as of 2 years ago, Central America, South America, and the Caribbean collectively fell below repopulation rate? In fact, on average, a country falls below repopulation rate today when the average citizen is earning over $5,000 a year. So the only countries that are really massively above repopulation rate are desperately poor countries. And so the question is,
yeah, it's got my attention.
Well, how do we maintain, if it turns out that like prosperity, gender equality, education, and access to technology create cultures where that are just unstable intrinsically, like what does the future of our species look like? And that's what we're really focused on. And how do we prevent that? And that's why we started the Pro-Natalist Foundation and why we wrote The Pragmatist Guide to Crafting Religion, which was our latest book, because like a lot of people, they first hear this and their first thought is, oh, give people money. But like, it turns out the less money you have, the more kids you have. So that's like not the answer. And like when you have free childcare, like in Europe, the countries with free childcare actually have lower fertility rates. And cash handouts don't work either. Like Hungary spent like 5% of its GDP last year on this and they got fertility rates up by like 1.6%. when like they were falling by like 2% a year before that or something. So it turns out the only real solution is probably religion. And that's something we go into a lot.
Yeah.
And that makes this very interesting right next to Bret Weinstein.
I mean, it's just kind of like a lot of things on this podcast. I learn mostly from my own example, and I know my kind of conversion to pronatalism has been cultural, if maybe tangentially a little bit religious, but not purely so. So I mean, this seems to be, and also knowing the examples of other people around me, I know, people coming from families with, their parents had 5 or 6 brothers and sisters are now have decided that they don't want children, which is very much a cultural thing as well. I mean, this is not like, these were people who, they frolicked and multiplied very well up until 5 minutes ago. And I know exactly the software these women and men have been downloading, because I was kind of, marinating in it myself until I realized that, wait a minute, I'm just like staring off the edge of the abyss here. But yeah, I mean, and I think that's a very interesting lever to pull. I think, what's a bit harder to do, I think, is the, any sort of top-down imposition of this stuff, which I think, we're talking about mega trends here. I mean, how do you see that? Because I mean, you've written an entire book about this. This is the Pragmatist Guide to Crafting Religion, which sounds very ambitious. But yeah, how would this work? I mean, in practical terms.
I mean, we're rabidly against any sort of top-down imposition. It doesn't work, and it always leads to evil. When you're, as a government, trying to decide who should have kids, who should breed, who should not breed, that always leads to evil. I'd like to preserve some aspect of our pluralistic society, but any one couple that represents one culture and decides to join the pro-natalist movement, decides to try to craft a culture that they can pass to their kids and that their kids want to maintain, can sort of save that cultural unit. Because, if we have 8 kids and our kids have 8 kids and we do that for just 11 generations, that's more descendants than live on Earth today. This is the problem is the homogenization of the world today. So many unique cultures are dying out. So that's one problem. The other problem is the economic effects of this, because we have sort of structured our society like a pyramid scheme that requires constant growth. I mean, yes, you see this in Social Security, which is a problem, but you also see this in debt. We as a society have been taking out debt at every level, which is fantastic if you're growing. If you make an investment, we used to be private equity people. If you'll make a $10 investment, right? And $2 of that is equity and $8 is debt, and that grows by just 20%. So it grew by $2. My equity investment has grown by 100%. I mean, 100%. But if it shrinks by just $1, my equity investment has dropped by 50%. If it shrinks by just $2, my entire equity investment is wiped out. And this is kind of what happened to Detroit, because their tax income started to go down and they were supporting a fire department pension and a police department pension from a time period, because these were functionally debts because these weren't pre-funded pensions, from a time when the city was much bigger. And then you get the same problem with the sewer systems and stuff like that. So you begin to have shutdowns of water supplies, and people hear falling populations and the first thing they think is cheap real estate. But when everybody knows that real estate is always declining in value, what you don't get is cheap real estate. You get a Detroit situation. You get endless urban blight, because it is no longer relevant to invest in real estate. Invest in the upkeep of real estate.
But if we're talking about like the basics of either how to craft a culture / religion that survives, that is what we would call intergenerationally durable, that is to say, like, it is passed.
Now, part of the real challenge of navigating almost any conversation is the seemingly nearly impossible task of remembering what was just said in the conversation minutes before. Because all of the anxiety from the Weinsteins to many other people is, we want to preserve our culture. And everybody's basically saying, the culture's in a death spiral. Is that the culture you want to preserve? Or is there another culture you'd like to preserve? Oh, no, I'd like to preserve what I value in the culture and let the death spiral stuff go away. Now, again, coming back to the whole religion question is fascinating, because part of, and I haven't yet read their book. I did pick up their book, and I do have it on my Kindle, but I haven't yet read their book. That I'm now, it's always kind of a horse race between all of the different little hobby horses that I'm interested in any given moment. And obviously when I do a video, it both in some ways satiates the desire, but also it just reinvigorates some of the interest. But religion, both for the Weinsteins and for the Collinses at this point, is pragmatic. That, well, they can see the pragmatism in past religions because those have succeeded. But then we need a new religion. But then you're back in this funny trap that we keep coming back to around again and again and again. I'd like to be religious, but I really don't believe it. Sarah Hayter said something almost identical to that. And it's interesting that this really where society is. I'd like the world to be enchanted, but it's dead. I'd like this, but that. I wish we had a religion. Now, again, you're sort of in Donald Hoffman territory here, where the religion doesn't have to be true at all. It just has to make sure we continue to multiply like rabbits. But that's not necessarily such a good idea either, because if the religion is just about human multiplication, the religion is also going to be guiding people in terms of how they should live and how they should behave. And that's going to have adaptive either positivity or negativity too. In other words, you can plan a religion that has everybody multiply by rabbits, but if they're killing each other in some other way because of the religion, well, that's going to be a problem. So it's very interesting how all of these motivations, all of these projects motivated by self-preservation that see religion as instrumental, I'll have this enormous gaping flaw that if the religion doesn't actually deliver truth, and I don't mean just propositional truth, I mean all 4 P's of truth. If the religion doesn't actually, this is where we get back to Vervaeke and Peterson and Logos, if the religion doesn't actually deliver on getting alignment with the Logos, to actually develop a culture that is going to be a culture of eternity, you're just going to, okay, now we don't have the problem of reproduction, but now we're back to the Weinstein problems, or we're back to, because of course, in some ways, if you think about Bret's whole thing, which he has said for a very long time, I should find that clip. That was a great clip. This is this great clip from Rebel Wisdom 5 years ago, where Bret, and he hasn't changed any of this, of course. This is the deep truth. And what's ironic about the deep truth is that the genetics don't need sort of a religion in order to multiply themselves beyond. This is just what they do.
An awakening to a deep truth. And the analogy I use is this. If you discovered that you were a robot and that you were sent to, I don't know, assassinate some person who was innocent, if you discovered that that was the explanation for you, you would reject your program, right? You as the robot.
I'm sorry. Every time I hear this, if you were an Intel chip and you discovered that the hard drive that you were connected with has Mac instead of Windows, you would reject Mac OS. No, you'd play Mac OS.
That had been given decency in order to get by everybody so you could commit your assassination would say, actually, I prioritize the values and I reject the mission that I've been sent on. That's who we are. We are that robot. We are on a genetic mission that is absolutely unacceptable.
How would you just succinctly define that genetic mission?
That genetic mission is
just propagation at all costs?
Propagation of your particular genetic spellings. And here's the key. It's a little subtle, but if you and I have different spellings for a particular, let's say, a respiratory enzyme, and let's say that respiratory enzyme functions better in you than in me. It's 10% more efficient. My respiratory enzyme still wants your respiratory enzyme to go extinct because it doesn't care about the function. It cares that that spelling is advanced, and your spelling is in conflict with my spelling. As long as yours is around, there will be fewer copies of mine. So our genomes are actually if I can just be clear about it, the mind fuck of the whole thing is that the entire evolutionary story is the cosmic spelling bee, and it ends in genocide, right? Once you realize that that's what you are, that you're built to advance your genetic spellings into the future generations, irrespective of what they spell, and that under circumstances like these, we can afford to be decent to each other, but if things were different, one of us would be putting the other in a gas chamber. No way. I want no part of that, and neither do you. So when people realize that that's really what they are built to be nice when it makes sense to be nice, and they're built to be genocidal in circumstances when genocide is the thing, then the question is, well, all of the things that you actually value, how consistent are they with being that robot on that mission?
So it sounds like you are sort of saying, at our root, we are nasty, brutish, and short, right? The old selfish gene kind of thing, compared to some ascensionist or triumphalist. Clearly, it's very prevalent in the self-help, popular psychology space. We are on the frothy edge of realizing our true natures as, spiritual beings, blah, blah, blah. Is that something you don't hold out hope for? You feel like at root, we are just self-oriented robot programs? What's our shot at redemption? Do we have one?
It's easier. It's easier than you would think, because the fact is, I'm telling you, we are that robot on that mission. Once you know that that's your mission, you could just reject it, right? I'm not putting anybody in a gas chamber. I just won't do it, right? I don't care about.
Again, it's this strange Gnosticism. But now we're back over here. And now we're basically saying, oh, what we really need is a religion that's going to energize us so that and then it's like, well, won't we then be sort of, so remember, the one thing that Bret, if you go back to his talk with Alistair McGrath, the one thing that I really appreciate about Bret is that Bret, in fact, sees, so you've got the genetic track and then you have the mimetic track. And I think Bret's a little naive about the way he sets up these two things. But, so these two are all about the mimetic track at this point. What we need is a religion that's going to, and the truth is that one question for them is, well, how can you be so sure that there isn't, in fact, a religion right now that perhaps is one of the religions that's doing okay, but when things fall to a certain realm, that religion isn't going to sort of kick up again? Because what we usually sort of, was it Foucault who talked about the fact that we really only sort of have a memory of like 40, 50 years, and we're usually talking about like our grandparents' generation or our parents' generation. That's always the generation we're responding to. How do you know that 40, 50 years, in fact, certain religions, I know probably the main religions that are already at play, are going to, in fact, continue to proliferate. And they're going to talk about the Jews a little bit here. They spend a fair amount of time talking about the Jews in Israel, and that's going to be really interesting for some of the Israeli audience in this little corner.
On from generation to generation, and there are future generations, or to reinforce an existing religion, to make it intergenerationally durable in the face of globalization and modern technology and prosperity, which is kind of the big sort of cliff for many existing religions where they're just like not able to survive in this modern environment. There seem to be like two simple keys to it. And I mean, our book is very long and goes into a lot of detail, but there seem to be two basic components. And Malcolm, you might want to clarify this further. But if I were to break it down, it would be one, find a reason why people would want to have kids. And that could be build a culture where everyone lives off the grid and literally you have to have kids because you need farmhands and like a retirement plan. Or it could be, build a culture that really idolizes having kids and that celebrates and elevates parenthood and makes it look really cool. There are different levers you can use to do this. And then the other element of an intergenerationally durable culture is it imparts fitness. And that's two types of fitness, obviously. Like one form of fitness is people who practice it have surviving offspring, clearly. The other part of it, though, is ideally it imparts some kind of advantage either within its own ecosystem or within a larger ecosystem. That could be, for example, many religions impart greater mental resiliency, better physical habits, like literally better like day-to-day fitness, but also professional fitness. Think about Latter-day Saints, who are often sought after sales hires because they, if you've been on a mission and you've been like pitching a kind of hard to pitch religion to people in another language, like, of course you can pitch SaaS. Like, that's easy. Those are the...
And I love that example too, because when you start thinking about this, you say, well, the actual, the Latter-day Saints and the Muslims have a similar problem. They have different problems in some ways because, of course, Latter-day Saints are so new and the Muslims are so old, but both of them have real issues with their foundation stories. And the thing about the Latter-day Saints foundation stories is that you're really hard pressed to find, these 10 lost tribes of Israel running around the United States. And if you know any history about the burned over district in upstate New York, you know that all these ideas are sort of circling around there and yada, yada, yada. But basically what everyone is saying here is it doesn't really actually matter the content of the religion. It just matters the payout. But once again, that's an extremely short-sighted thing, because you're going to go full hand wives' tale on this thing. Successful religions are very interesting things because they do, sort of like Bret Weinstein talks about in terms of mimetic genetics, they do travel through time. And they do evolve as they travel through time. And for a religion to actually travel well through time, they both have to, you need things that stay the same and things that evolve and adapt. And it's a very complex little dance that goes on with respect to it. And what's interesting is that both the Collins and Bret and Heather, and probably Eric too, they're looking through it through the frame, the evolutionary frame, let's say, and, well, whatever frame you use to look through something, that frame is going to select what you see and what you value.
The two elements. And so it's pretty simple. Motivate people to have kids and give them a competitive advantage.
Yeah, so to follow up on something she was saying, where she's like, a lot of religions, I think people aren't familiar with the statistics here, which is religion is the single thing that protects people from fertility collapse the most, but it is still eroding in the face of our modern toxic culture. You look at something like Mormons, by current statistics, they've probably fallen below replacement rate, or they will within 5 years. And I say when Mormons have fallen below replacement fertility rate, that's not, the canary in the coal mine dying. That's when the miner's skin is bubbling off. You are in deep.
Again, the dude is good. I might have to take. He's a very clever man. He's really good. Chris Williamson talked about the fact of you both got to get the idea and you need the meme. And this guy does. This guy's very sharp.
When the Mormons fall below repopulation rate, but some cultures seem to be really resistant for prosperity-induced fertility collapse. And keep in mind, we're talking about prosperity-induced. We're not talking about the countries that are hand-to-mouth starvation. They still have really high fertility. But in the prosperity-induced ones, like one country that is just like off the charts good with fertility is Israel. And you actually see this around conservative Jewish cultures. They are one of the most resistant cultures to fertility collapse. A lot of people think Amish culture is resistant to fertility collapse, but it's really not. Anabaptist culture more generally. So it is a little more resistant to fertility collapse than other cultures, but the primary resilience comes from being sort of air-gapped, a cybersecurity term, i.e. when they use cell phones, they also have fertility collapse, but when they don't use cell phones, they don't have fertility collapse.
It's the cell phone! Now it's interesting, of course, because in terms of our conversations with the Israelis in this corner, they are the ones pointing out that, we had a whole bunch of these immigrants, really religious immigrants, who moved to Israel, and they are having all of these kids, and they're studying Torah the whole time, so they're hyper religious, and they're really reproducing fast, but they're doing it on the dime of the state. And the rest of the Israeli population, a good bit of which is secular, a good bit of which is not Jewish, are looking at them and saying, I'm not sure we're going to continue to pay for that. And that's when, of course, things are going to get interesting. In other words, part of the difficulty is relevance realization, it's frames, it's trying to figure out what's going on. You look at these very religious Israelis and say, well, they're multiplying like rabbits. That must be the... But again, you're selecting the ideas in isolation from all of the other ideas. And if the state of Israel gets to the point of saying, yeah, we're not going to subsidize that anymore, what will happen? Now suddenly you're going to have a whole bunch of all the same pressures that a lot of other people are having to begin to reduce this dynamic.
Which I think shows where this is coming from in our society. If you view, this is something Simone was talking about, if you view religions and more traditional cultures as this aspect of humanity that evolved alongside us to sort of enhance our individual fitness, that's why they figured out all this stuff that progressives are just now realizing, like, oh yeah, you should have arbitrary self-denial rituals from like Ramadan to Lent to Feast of the Firstborn. Every ancient culture is like, yeah, you should like not just eat whatever you want all the time. You should have arbitrary fasting rituals and stuff like that. And now you hear like, oh, I'm on my juice cleanse or I'm on my fast today. And like they figured this out after throwing it out for 50 years. It's like, what else did you guys throw out? But anyway,
again, the parallels between these guys and Bret, they're super interesting.
This is like a traditional healthy cultural unit. But you have this thing that we call wokeism, but it's more than wokeism. It's like this virus that exists behind our world today and evolved out of religion. We actually argue in our book it evolved out of Hicksite Quakerism. But it's not a full one. It can only survive by parasitizing on healthy cultures because it doesn't motivate a birth rate. And so it has to very aggressively get into things like the education system to convert people from these healthy cultures that are still motivating high birth rates to survive. And it's really scary because it is so effective at reaching our kids. As you say, you have friends, even at reaching you, you begin to normalize to what the virus says is normal. And this is where I get to something, you were talking about how some conservatives may disagree with us or whatever. I don't know, but I consider myself a conservative, right? And I think one thing that's great about the Conservative Party or conservatism in general is that we have a diversity of ideological perspectives that come from our traditional cultural backgrounds that we are trying to preserve. Whereas the progressive movement is just sort of this virus. If I go to a far progressive Unitarian Universalist versus a far progressive, some other far progressive Muslim or a far progressive Jew, and you scratch beneath the surface, many of their beliefs about morality, about the nature of the world are just the same.
This is a super interesting point.
If I go to a conservative Muslim versus a conservative Jew versus a conservative, evangelical, their actual views about how the world works are radically different. Yet they can work together to achieve a combined outcome, and that's one thing I really respect.
Now, what's interesting is that they can, but now we're sort of back into questions about secularity. This from Jerry Mueller's The Mind in the Market. Come into the London Exchange, a place more respectable than a court. You will see assembled representatives of every nation for the benefit of mankind. These are the Jew, the Muslim, and the Christian deal with one another as if they were of the same religion, and reserve the name infidel for those who go bankrupt. Here the Presbyterian puts his trust in the Anabaptist. The Anglican accepts the Quaker's promissory note. Upon leaving these peaceful free assemblies, one goes to the synagogue for another drink. Yet another goes to have himself baptized in a large tub in the name of the Father through the Son to the Holy Ghost. Another, his son's foreskin is cut off, and over the infant he mutters some Hebrew words that he doesn't understand at all. Some go to their church and await divine inspiration with their hat in their hand, and all are content. A little earlier in the book on the Enlightenment, Voltaire's main concern was remarkably consistent through the course of his long career. He championed the pursuit of happiness, the expansion of individual freedom, the rule of law, and the use of human reason modeled on the methods of the natural sciences. There's the scientific lab leak right there. To challenge the non-rational claims of religious faith. Closely related to these concerns was Voltaire's long campaign against the Catholic Church and his antipathy towards the political claims of institutionalized religion. You can still hear this through Steven Pinker quite clearly. Voltaire's significance for our topic comes from his popularization of two important themes: the legitimation on political grounds of the pursuit of wealth through market activity, and the moral legitimation of the consumption of wealth. It was the former theme that he developed in the Philosophical Letters, a work of social and political criticism that marked the beginning of the French Enlightenment as a public force. Voltaire's defense of the market in the letters and later in his philosophical dictionary was political rather than economic. Market activity was valued not because it made society wealthier, but because the pursuit of economic self-interest was less dangerous than the pursuit of other goals, above all religious zealotry. Again, this is a time in which they're very concerned about religious people killing each other over religion. So let's just switch and have them all want to get rich. Because if they want to get rich, they'll stop fighting, and that's where all their interest will be, and won't that be great? And now we have Malcolm and Simone saying, you know what's at the heart of this? Wanting to get rich. Because once you get up over $5,000, your culture's in an economic nosedive. I once read something. Where did I read that? It's like, I think a guy was a Jew. And like, he said really weird stuff. But it was sort of famous, you know? He said, like, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Voltaire never would have said that. And then he said, you can't serve God and mammon.
Respect about the conservative movement.
Yes. I think it's also kind of a function of being out of power. I mean, power at the center consolidates, and it's very easy to align with it. Even, there's a lot of people who maintain the trappings of whatever, ethnic flavor they have, and they're like nominally Muslim or something. But it's pretty clear what exactly power demands of you now, just because it's in the water. I think a lot of people, like you said, if you scratch them, it's like, the progressive 10 commandments are just below the surface. It's because they're in everything. That's how I know exactly what software, my maybe not anti-natalist, but non-natalist friends are on, because this has been piped in hot through every medium for, since we've had television. I mean, that's, it's pretty clear what you're supposed to believe. And if you're kind of agreeable, and if you're interested in status games beyond your own little village, which is kind of one of the problems that has led to kind of fertility collapse here as well, because people are, they're interested in what's going on in America. I mean, obviously, I'm included in this group of people. That's going to lead to this, and it's going to lead to people essentially running the same moral and having the same orientation.
Here's the great thing, though, I think from a lot of people's perspective, is this is leading to a genetic change. So the people who are sort of susceptible to this mimetic virus are essentially genociding themselves from the gene pool really aggressively. And if you look at the rate to which voting patterns, so like if you look in the US, the rate to which voting patterns correlate with genetics, which is like 30 to 50%, and you look at differential fertility rates, we should see a genetic one standard deviation shift more conservative in voting patterns within the next century at like a genetic level. But there's other negative genetic.
Now, this is what's so hilarious, because we just listened to Bret Weinstein say, your genetics are doing this, and you just have to opt out of it. Now, what it seems like we opt into sort of Voltaire's decision, and that's killing us. And so the genetics don't really have much of a say. It's just fascinating, the similarities and contrast between these worldviews and how it all fits together. Well, I am out of time, but this, as is often the case, I start a video thinking, I want to poke around at these people. And you start doing a little bit of digging, and it's like, I've done a little bit of digging offline too, but it's a little bit of digging, and I mean, a little bit of digging not in front of the camera. And then it's like, hey, wait a minute. These guys are just like Bret Weinstein, alike but different. And the mimetic and genetic levels are working in very interesting ways. And this utilitarian religion is working in very different ways, and sort of the way around, religious warfare. Of course, Voltaire and the Enlightenment, and that's what secularism did. We don't have to fight about religion. Let's all get rich. Yeah, that'll do it. That's the key. Anyway, I'll be very curious to hear what y'all have to say about this video. So leave a comment.